So don't overthink this. Just see what you already have. How can you spruce it up and make it a little more valuable and package it so that people want it?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gumroad podcast. I'm your host, Justin Michaelet, a senior writer at Gumroad, where I channel and reverse engineer the tactics, strategies, and processes of top creators. Each week on the Gumroad podcast, I'll be interviewing creators and entrepreneurs who are at the top of their field. On this week's episode, I hosted Blake Emal, CMO of Copy.AI and CEO of Float, and I just loved this conversation. Enjoy. Our guest today is the multi-talented creator, thinker, and marketer, Blake Emal. Thanks for being here, Blake.
Thank you for pronouncing my name correctly, by the way.
A lot of people don't get that.
No, you're one of like maybe 1,000 people in my life that pronounce it correctly. So thank you so much.
I have a similar name. Very few people know how to pronounce my name. It's Michaelet, by the way.
Yeah, it's not Mikolai.
Exactly.
Mikolai. Yeah.
Well, let me give folks who are new to you a bit more granularity on your background because it is fascinating to me. You've been a marketer for the better part of a decade, but you also have a diverse array of small bets in the Daniel Vassallo sense and projects. So let's touch on a few of those during this conversation. And for context, just let me summarize your journey up front as best I can. After high school, you moved to France and you lived there for 2 years in maybe, 4 different cities, Blake?
Yep.
Cool. Learned to speak French fluently and then came back, realized you didn't have professional skills, as you have put it, and got a job, or as you have also put it, lucked into a job on the French team of an SEO company. Is that right?
That's 100% correct. Yep.
And you've been in marketing, and you're the accidental marketer.
And I didn't want to do it either. I hated it for the first couple of years. Absolutely.
Now, of course, you're the chief marketing officer in-house at Copy.AI, a great company that is mind-blowing. I've used the product. Let me ask you a direct question. Do you think there is going to be AI-generated products vice just AI-generated copy and content in the next decade?
I believe it's going in that direction where eventually AI will get good enough at knowing how you like to talk and how you would put things, is that you could basically create products from scratch. Obviously, AI is not going to, maybe it gets to a point where it knows how to communicate to a 3D printer and like print out your products and stuff. I don't think we're anywhere close to that yet. But for digital products, I think it's very possible that you could, with the click of a button, write an ebook or create a Notion template or do all this kind of stuff that people are doing now, but takes a decent amount of time to do. I think we'll get there eventually. And that would be definitely the goal, to help more people create more things. But ultimately, I do want to backtrack and just make sure we all understand that the goal of AI should not be to replace anybody or to replace creativity. It's all about boosting it. It's all about adding on to what you can already do. So if you're already a great writer, AI should make you a great writer that can scale that a lot more, not do everything for you. If you're not a super strong writer, AI should help you kind of get from 0 to 1 and maybe start building that skill set a little bit more. So that's more how I would definitely approach it right now. But over time, I think we'll be pretty blown away by what AI is able to do for us.
Yeah, I totally agree. I write these Twitter threads sometimes, and they take an extraordinary amount of hours to produce, to just distill down somebody's Twitter timeline, for example. And I'm like, there's just no way GPT-3 could replicate that yet. But I have now started to question even that thesis. It's truly mind-blowing. I mean, what I think Copy.AI is doing is not just revolutionizing copy, but the creative process. You'll never be at a loss for ideas if AI is generating them for you and then you refine them further. So anyway, I super respect what you're doing there. You're also the CEO of Float, which is a course builder on top of Notion. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, really quick story on that. A couple of months, beginning of this year, I had a bunch of courses that I wanted to launch, and I wanted to launch them for free because I like doing that. I like just giving people information when I can. Sometimes you got to charge. But so I had a couple that were just kind of in my Notion board, and I wanted to launch them. And I noticed a couple things. First off, existing course creation platforms are really expensive for somebody that's trying to sell something for free. They're also a little bit more technical and harder to use because there's so many features. And I basically had to like copy and paste everything I'd already worked so hard on back into something else and reformat it and do all that stuff. So there's so much friction. And I decided, like, well, it's already in Notion. Maybe I should build something. So I did at that moment what anybody would do with a great idea. And I sat on it for 3 months and did nothing about it because I didn't have the skill set to build it myself. But thankfully, I started working at Copy.AI, and my co-founder, Zach, is an engineer there as well. So we have the same schedule. We know the same stuff. We're interested in the same things. And he really liked this approach to tackling this problem. And thankfully, he had also built something on top of Notion already called Potion Pages, which is kind of like super, and basically just lets you translate your Notion page into a website. And so we already had this little framework that we could build on top of and just make it very specific to this. And we've been at it since, pretty close to launching here, honestly. So pretty soon we got 1,500 people on the wait list right now, and done a bunch of demos and sold some lifetime deals. Right now, we're very much a build in public company, and so we've made about $10,000 and haven't launched yet. And so that's pretty cool. We got some money in the bank that we don't even really quite need yet, and that's awesome. And we'll get to MRR later and be sharing that all publicly. But within a couple weeks, we should have some beta users in there.
That's awesome. Well, let me go through sort of the menu of other things that you are involved with in a rapid pace, and then we'll like center on one of them at the end. You're terrific on Twitter. You've blown up in recent months there due to just a constant barrage of high quality Twitter threads, which are very hard to produce. I know you don't like to produce them, but they seem to be working super well, and they're very helpful and valuable for people. So I would point people to your Twitter, obviously, at Hey Blake. Second, you audit websites, you analyze landing pages, you curate Twitter writers and thinkers, you analyze viral tweets. There's just so much that you're doing on the side. Plus, you have all these Gumroad products, the ultimate Twitter thread system, which is, I think, a Notion doc with a full system to create threads. It's $9, and that's done super well for you. And then you have Blitz, Blast, which is the CRO audit and the website audit, and then Tweet Code and Twitter Blitz. Tweet Code is formatting and styling and growing your account. Is that correct?
Yeah. No, it's been so long since I focused on those, even though like I'm starting to forget what I've even made. I don't know if that ever happens to anybody else, but yeah, so I've got a bunch of Gumroad products up, but I definitely don't want to give off the impression that every single one of my things have worked. There's been so many, like at least 90 flops for every one good thing that I've done.
Yeah, and the last one, I just learned this, that, well, I knew you were starting your own community around helping people build digital products, which is called Launchables, but I just learned that you are going to be using Gumroad for that as well. So this is where I want to focus in on. I think you've had this idea for several months now, but now it's sort of taken root after a very successful question you merely asked on Twitter who would be interested in building a new digital product in 2 weeks. So let's talk about Launchables.
Yeah. So first off, I have not been thinking about this for months. I literally thought of this a few minutes before I asked that question on Twitter. So I just want to back up and say I'm not a very planned person. It's something I need to really work on. But yeah, the response was pretty good. I kind of set a hard cap on that. So the way that I did that announcement was not really announcing that I was doing anything, but saying, I'm thinking about doing this. If you think this is a good idea, please reply so that I know you actually care about this idea. And if we hit a certain amount, which for me was 150 replies, then I'll do it. And we got to 150 within a day. And so I was like, okay, cool. I guess I'm doing this. And so I put up a fleet of basically that tweet, and I just said, I guess I'm doing this thing. And I was kind of committed in from that point. And now I'm just going through building the curriculum, getting everybody kind of pre-subscribed. That's what I've been focusing on now. We've got it's going to be an interesting one because I have 500 people pre-subscribed to that list, and I don't think that I can do a cohort of 500 people. That might be a little difficult. So we'll see how that truly goes. But I'm learning a ton in the process and just trying to figure out from the world's best at this, people like Dickie Bush and people like yourself, how to actually do this thing because I haven't before. But yeah, we'll be using Gumroad as kind of the payment processor and the way to set up all the products and everything. I think it's the easiest possible way to do this. And I'll just be helping people launch a new digital product from whether you have an idea or not. Just come into the group. We can help ideate together. We can help develop the idea, actually make the thing and promote it and launch it together within 15 days. And then after that fact, there will be a 2 week break in between cohorts, but in between, the previous cohort will actually have access to me to get a little bit more consulting and help individually. So the first 2 weeks of the cohort will be the official portion of it, where we really go through things as a group and get stuff set up and come up with ideas and help each other out. But then after the fact, there's a cool down period where you've probably already launched your product or gotten pretty close to it within that 15 days, but I can help you after the fact and maybe even help you plot your next one. So my goal really is, if this thing costs $100 for a cohort, I want you to at least make $1,000 in the next year on digital products. And I don't think that that's that crazy. I think it's pretty possible for people of any audience size really to make $1,000 online in the next year with digital products. You just kind of need to know the framework and how to write copy and how to set it all up. And that can be a little bit confusing.
Yeah, I agree with you about that. The longer I work at Gumroad, the more I see people crushing it. And you don't have to start with a large audience. In fact, it works the other way around. You publish a product that builds your audience.
Yep.
And I've seen that recurring pattern over and over again. One thing that I wanted to ask you, though, is 15 days to many people would sound irrationally difficult to build a product from scratch, even without an idea. But I think people don't realize how small these products can be. And I would love for you to reflect on that.
Yeah. So the things that, and I published a thread recently that was 42 ways to make your first dollar online. And I plan on using that as part of the curriculum as well. There are so many different things that you can do that probably already exist that you've already written. For example, a Notion template that you've already put together, an Airtable that you can sell access to, or a Google Sheet that you can sell access to. There's so much stuff out there that you can do. It's not just an ebook, and people need to get over that notion that like it has to be an ebook or it has to be a video course. Those are not the only two viable things. And even if you do one of those things, you could create a video course that is 15 minutes long, and if it's packed with valuable information, you can sell that for, I wouldn't put a price tag on it necessarily, because I don't know, for it depends on the person, but for $10, tons of people would buy that video, for example. And then you get enough people in there, you get 100 people that buy that, you've made $1,000. So my goal is to get you to that point where you realize it doesn't have to be a full online course, or it could be, if that's already kind of what you've been building. It doesn't have to be this crazy long ebook. It doesn't have to be the end all be all ultimate guide. It can just be something like a system you've built that's been helpful for you, however small. And that's stuff that people want. Notion template, just as one example, there are thousands. I don't know what the metrics look like for Gumroad. I'm sure it's crazy for Notion templates being sold on Gumroad, but thousands of dollars every single day just for that stuff. And you probably have a lot of that already written. So don't overthink this. Just see what you already have. How can you spruce it up and make it a little more valuable and package it so that people want it?
Yeah, I've talked to Janelle Loy in the past, and she kicked off or popularized these Notion template products with Newsletter OS and Podcast OS. And she told me that she spends about 150 hours producing those, but you don't need to spend that long. And her price point's around $50 now for that product.
Those products are really big, by the way. Those Notion templates are like hundreds of pages.
Yep.
That also doesn't need to be the case.
Yes, exactly. I was hoping you'd say that. They can be much more modest than that. And in fact, the on-ramp for a lot of these creators can be pay what you want. I mean, you don't have to charge for it initially. Or you could pay what you want and then start to, as you sort of assess the demand, increase the price over time. And that happens all the time. In fact, it's a way to generate demand right up front because people are getting in at that lower rate, knowing that you're going to raise the price and so forth.
Yeah, and one cool thing about Gumroad, and I mean, you can do this with other stuff. Gumroad just has it kind of integrated, but you build your email list. So even if you sell this stuff for free and give it away, you'll obviously get more people in for free than if you charge for it, which means you start building an email list. It's one of the easier ways to start an email list, honestly. So even if your main goal is not to sell digital products, but you do have a main goal of building your email list, this is a really good way to get started on that, because you can give something away for free, and it's this really valuable lead magnet that usually people associate Gumroad products with something that you need to pay for. So you give it away for free. It has this air of value, even without you even being able to see the thing. And you start building your list out. And then the next time that you want to launch something that's paid, you have this group of people that have already supported you. And instead of cold outreach, you're doing more warm outreach, saying, hey, I'm back. And I built something that's even cooler than last time. And I put a lot into this, so I'm charging this time, but I hope that you'll support me. And that can be a really powerful mechanism. It builds on each other. Like my first Gumroad products didn't get thousands of dollars. They just got maybe a couple sales. But for me, I'd never done that before. So breaking that barrier is step one. Building the email list is kind of step two. And then you just keep doing more and more. And you start realizing that you're way up the ladder and you didn't even realize that you got up there.
Yeah, I think a lot of this stuff doesn't really it doesn't there is, as I said before, a counterintuitive nature to the internet. And the people that you have seen that are successful, they have broken the code. And it takes a while to break the code. What it does, in my opinion, it takes you just participating online, interacting with people. And it all becomes obvious after a year or two. And certainly you've broken that code. I want to talk about your creative process, not only in generating Twitter threads, but other things. And I want to talk about it from the standpoint of your swipe file and the way that you consume information. This is one of my favorite questions because it's my philosophy that you should create from the things that you're consuming. And a swipe file is obviously one way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Could you describe that file to us?
Yeah, it's not as robust as I'd like it to be, but I do have a public swipe file at swipefile.me that anybody can check out and kind of just brainstorm what that might look like for you. But it's just a Notion doc. Again, bringing it back to Notion docs, but it's really just a bunch of different categories. So ads that I see and emails that I see and really good copy and things like that. I'm a marketer, so it's a lot of marketing stuff that I put in there. Sometimes I actually give Easter eggs in there of stuff that I create that I just kind of pop in there and see if anybody notices. Uh, but I definitely look back at that and think or use that to come up with new ideas. I'm a very spontaneous person, so I've mentioned multiple times on different podcasts as well. I think you'd be really disappointed if you saw my true creative process like on paper and my organization. I've got a ton of stuff in Notion, but I don't always look at it all the time. The swipe file I do visit pretty often and I try to update it, but it's still not as robust as I would like it to be. But really, it's all just about collecting ideas now because you will forget them. And I'm a huge proponent of just writing stuff down all the time. And that's because I know that if I do it with pen and paper, I'll remember it most. If I do it in like Notion, I'll remember it second most. And so if I at least take that step, even if I never look back at it, the chances that I'll remember it are way better than if I just see it in the wild and think, oh, that's cool, and then move on. So it's more a memory mechanism for me, and I do draw upon that stuff. Another thing that I do that's kind of like a swipe file, I guess, when I'm looking for ideas of new topics to go about talking about or whatever, I'll just go look at other accounts that I really respect, and I'll just do a deep dive in their content and see what are the patterns of formatting, what are the things they talk about that people actually like and care about, and how can I give my take on that. I think that's a really underrated, super valuable way that you can create content as well. That doesn't necessarily go into my swipe file, but it goes into my head swipe file, I guess. And often it just goes directly into a tweet right there when I think of it. So that's more like how I swipe stuff. It should be better than it currently is, but I would definitely recommend it for anybody. Just like set up a Notion doc and start putting stuff in there that you think is cool.
Yeah, the value of it is compounding over time as well. I call these things books of wisdom that people generate, and the inspiration is literally endless and constant these days. You come across things that you love multiple times a day, just save them. And I think one like secret weapon of internet creators is that they recognize their memories are fallible, and these things that we come across are so when we scroll and lose them, they're gone forever.
Yeah, 100%. I lose stuff all the time. I'm still a victim to this. If I had one thing that I truly regret about my career so far, it's the lack of notes that I've taken.
Yeah.
I wish that I would have taken more time taking notes. Not to say that I'm glad that I lived in the moment a lot of the time, but most of that's just being lazy and knowing that I probably should have taken notes in those moments and just didn't because I was lazy, not because I was living in the moment. So that's a huge regret that I've definitely had.
Yeah. This is a 500-year-old concept, by the way. I mean, it stretches back to what people did in terms of commonplacing at the invention of the printing press, and they just put all of their best thoughts in one common place. And so these systems are ancient in a way, and we have so many new tools to make them even more powerful. Speaking of tools, I think you use Canva, correct? Figma and Brandbird. I would love to know about those three products and how you use them.
Yeah, more and more I'm using Brandbird. So my friend Jim from Twitter is going to get a good promo here for Brandbird, but it's almost exclusively for Twitter. You could use it for other stuff, but it's really meant for that sizing and that use case. Just lets you transform how things look, especially screenshots, and make them look a lot nicer than they normally would. So I use this a lot in my threads to try to move the story along. In case I have more visual people, because you never know, like everybody learns a little bit differently. There are a lot of people on Twitter that do really like the written word. There are a lot of people that still are skim and scan, and threads are not very good for skimming and scanning because there's no clear headlines and nothing's really bolded and there's no formatting like that. So I find that images help on that. So that's the main use case for that. Canva, Figma, I use them fairly interchangeably. I like Figma more just because it's more powerful and I can do way more than just graphics. Like I can do everything in Canva in Figma. It just maybe takes a tiny bit more time, but it's a little bit more powerful. So I'll swap between those. If I just have a really quick project and something I need to whip a social share image for, I'll just use Canva really quickly. But I think people like need to realize that Canva is really, really good and convenient for non-designers, but it's also not going to make you look professional unless you kind of know what you're doing. So you need to be a little careful with Canva, but it's a really great tool if you kind of know what you're doing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they're built for people who aren't technical experts to do very well, but
Yep.
and I think those things take iteration as well, and you find your own style, your own distinct style over time. And and I agree. I love how your visuals look. You sort of like have the screenshots sort of angled back, like Star Wars style, to
Yeah.
some extent. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very, very cool product that a lot of people don't know about. Where are you going now? Where do you anticipate you'll be a year from now in the journey? And hard to predict, but what sort of direction are you trying to take?
Uh, well, I'll have another kid in July, so I know that's going to be a part of the roadmap.
You have like at last count 12 children, correct?
Over 1,000 at this point. Yeah.
Exactly.
This is only kid number 3. I deeply exaggerate that fact. But, yeah, so that's going to be like the main thing. But career wise, I obviously Copy.AI just keeps growing and growing, and I think big things are coming there. We'll be improving the product, improving the design, improving basically everything, and really trying to take this to the next level. So that's going to be really exciting over the next year. For Float, the hope is to keep it small. I'd love to keep it a small team and really just bootstrap the whole thing and help as many people as possible create things. So whether you're doing a course for free or for fairly cheap, or you're just a new creator, I really want to help people there. And one of my major goals within the next year is not just to get a good customer base there, but to be a hub for people to know how to actually create good courses. Because there's a lot of courses out there, not a lot of information on how to make a course that's actually really good for learning and how to improve the teaching for online courses. And so I want to become a resource for that as well through Float. I think a lot of the content will be through that channel. And then Launchables, a year from now, who knows? I haven't launched it yet, so we will see how that goes. And I'm definitely not shy about stopping a project if it doesn't have legs or if it's not going to be beneficial or not live up to what I think it should be. So it definitely has to meet a certain threshold. And if it does, then I'm going to keep doing that and help as many people as possible make their first dollar online.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier that you were an accidental marketer. In other words, you didn't really like it at first. You didn't see it as a long-term gig for you. But zooming out, is marketing simple in your view? Does it come down to basic things? And what is counterintuitive about it uh, on the internet these days?
I think that if you're able to specialize, it can be pretty simple. Unfortunately, a lot of marketers are asked to do a billion things. It's not necessarily like that in engineering. You could be a full stack engineer and be asked to do multiple things, but most people are very specialized on that side of things. When you get into marketing, people just kind of expect you to do a bunch of different stuff. And those skill sets are really different. Like writing copy for a website is a totally different skill set than even writing copy for an email. But then even going further than that, it's not just about writing. There's also this whole analytics side that is nothing to do with writing. It's a completely different skill set, but you kind of have to know it all. So I think that really to become a good marketer, you do need multiple years of trying new things and having stuff thrown at you and figuring things out that you have no clue how to do, or else you're going to have huge gaps because so much is expected in terms of covering a wide array of topics and have deeper knowledge on more things. It's kind of unfair a lot of the time in marketing. In some ways, though, it is very simple. You boil it down to it, it's really just giving people what they want when they want it and trying to find ways to communicate that effectively in ways that speaks to people. It's all writing and speaking and just meeting people where they're at. The hard part is that every single human being on the planet is a totally different person, and so there's no way one way that works, and that can be challenging for sure. But I think you can really never go wrong whether you're an ads person, an SEO person, a social media person. You can't really ever go wrong by giving away free knowledge as much as you possibly can and being interesting and being helpful. That's usually a winning strategy for a brand or a person. The I guess I'd mention as well that one interesting thing that's kind of happening now is that brands are no longer built by the brand, but by the people behind the brand. And if you think back to like early days of Coca-Cola, I couldn't really name anybody at that company or who was influential. And I think social media has really changed the game on that. Now, your favorite companies, or even like just the companies you kind of know who's behind them now. And CEOs and tech people have become celebrities, whereas that wasn't always the case. And we really know the people behind the brands now. So if you're building something, I think the simplest way to look at marketing is the people inside here have to be compelling and interesting and giving away free value. And the product has to correlate with that. And the product has to keep getting better. But that's what people truly care about now is upfront, who's building this thing? Why should I care? What's in it for me? And over time, they start caring about the logo a little bit more, but it takes a long time to get to that point now.
I totally agree. I mean, I guess the best way to say it is that there are companies of creators these days, individual creators who are breakout stars at all levels of the company. And I think there's a whole raft of companies that are starting to understand that now.
Definitely.
Well, Blake, thank you for being here. We're trying to make these episodes super efficient, super snappy. Give people things to think about, help them learn. So I really appreciate you taking the time today. This is our first episode. You have the eternal honor of being our first guest.
It's awesome. It feels good. That's awesome. I love Gumroad. So being the first guest is pretty cool. And thanks so much for having me on. Anytime that I can do anything for you, just let me know, Justin. And
awesome.
Yeah.
Can you do me a favor?
Yeah.
Can we do your patented wave?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Thanks, Blake, again, and talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Justin.